Welcome to Va-Dor's special event program on Zoom tonight. It's June 11th, and we have with us tonight, I'm pleased to announce that we have Scott Greenberg here. Scott is from the Oh My God, I'm Getting Older and So Is My Mom radio show, and he has a book of the same name. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be with you tonight. I really am. Hi, Emily. I am really excited to be with you. I love talking, which I'm sure you will know by the time I'm done. Let me tell you a little bit about me. Yes, I have a radio show, and I wrote a book. Here's the book. Oh my God, I'm getting older. So is my mom. I've been doing the radio show for about 8.5 years, and I talk about issues that confront boomers and their parents. And I'm happy to, at the end of the night, answer any question about anything, even about something I didn't talk about, if it's relevant. So feel free to ask anything. But in addition to the radio show, I do a few other things. I am the treasurer of the National Guardianship Association. I'm also the treasurer of the Florida State Guardianship Association. I am past president of that organization. I'm on the advisory council of the Area Agency on Aging. I'm on the board of directors of the Certified Senior Advisor magazine. I am also, what else am I? I'm a nationally certified Alzheimer's educator. I've spoken for 10 years, soon to be 11, at Alzheimer's Community Cares Educational Conference. And my day job is that I'm the CEO of a home care agency. I won't talk much about that unless anybody wants to talk about home care, and then I will tell you more about that. So as I said, I'm willing to talk about pretty much anything, but this was billed about what have we learned about caring for ourselves and for our parents, if applicable, during the pandemic, if you will. Well, I don't know about you. I learned a few things. I learned about things like delivery dudes. I learned about Uber Eats, DoorDash, Instacart. My wife is willing to trade me in for the Instacart delivery guy. I'm just saying, I used to joke about my mother. She loved her step stool more than she loved my father. That's true, by the way. She kept the step stool in the divorce. But the Instacart's really there. How about Shipt? I've learned the difference between curbside pickup and plain old regular takeout. I never knew how important hair and nails were until you didn't have them anymore. We brought into our office a nail person. Don't tell the authorities. You would have thought I had given everybody the biggest Christmas bonus they ever had received. And one of the things I learned most is exactly how valuable toilet paper can be in the midst of a pandemic. It's nearly impossible to live without it, we have learned. We learned new terminology. We learned COVID-19. We learned N95 and K95. We learned PPE. We learned essential versus non-essential, even though I think that is in the eye of the beholder, is it not? Essential services is, I guess it depends where you sit. We learned a little about telehealth, all right? Telehealth, I know that they can see my tonsils, but they can't take my blood pressure. So is telehealth good or is it bad? And I'm gonna come back to this later. Is that the future or is that the past and a temporary solution? We also learned that we don't necessarily see elective surgery the same way, do we? Elective surgery may be unimportant to some and extremely important. I do have the chat room open, so I will answer questions as we go, and I'm glad that that came up. I'm certainly happy or pleased and willing to answer questions all the time. So somebody asked me, what is N95 and K95? The N95 masks are the masks that are medical and get fitted for you. And you shouldn't be wearing those, even though I see a lot of people wearing them. They're really more for medical professionals. And the KN95 masks are just the Chinese version of that. So, but back to elective surgery, there's a lot of things. If you can't walk and you need a meniscus surgery, the fact that it was elective and you couldn't do it really was somewhat troublesome to some people. I also learned, I don't know about you, I can only watch so much Law and Order. I can only watch so many daily briefings. And Dr. Birx has more scarves than any human being should ever own. So those are a lot of the things that we did learn. But we learned some serious things. And they're not all fun. We learned about loneliness. We learned about separation. We learned about quarantine. I know someone on this call has a loved one in an assisted living community, and being only able to visit through a window is very hard. It's very complicated. We learned that we are social people, that we need to be together, and the separation and isolation that this pandemic has created has had wide implications that cross many barriers. So we've learned about loneliness. We've learned about loneliness ours, and if we have parents or our children, right, or grandchildren. I have 3 grandchildren. Not being able to see them takes a toll. Isolation takes a toll. We learned, for example, that dying during a pandemic is not like it is at other times. I went to a funeral last week of my best friend's mother, and this is another lesson learned. We learned that you can die because of COVID-19 and never have had the disease. So to illustrate, my friend's mother lived in an assisted living community or an independent living community, and she was quarantined for the better part of 3 months. They delivered food to her every meal, which was terrific, but she didn't see anybody. She was stuck in her 1-room studio apartment. She was watching the news, which God knows the news is not fun to watch these days, is it? She lost the ability to socialize and interact, and she didn't have any physical activity. She didn't have a lot of mobility. And while she did talk to her kids and her grandkids, the reality is that not all of us handle technology as well as others. Right? We know that from the Zoom meeting. And so ultimately she ended up having a stroke. And my friend, who is like the brother I never had, is convinced that while she never had COVID-19, all right, she might as well have died with it. So that's another tragedy. And then there's the whole hospital experience, all right? We were terrified to go to the hospital. We would do anything but go to the hospital for a few reasons. One, we didn't want to catch COVID-19. We didn't want to go left instead of right, and God knows there are implications there, all right? But if we were admitted, nobody could come and see us, and that is really hard. I did a show Monday night on Alzheimer's disease. Imagine somebody with Alzheimer's disease being admitted to the hospital and their loved one not being able to visit them. It was really hard. How do you make sure that that person is being cared for properly when we all know that if you have a chronic disease, different in fact than the disease you're being admitted for, there is very little that you can do if you can't be present to make sure that the nursing staff knows all that there is to know. So we were afraid to go to the hospital, and what were the complications or implications of that? Heart attack deaths are significantly on the rise in this county, as are stroke deaths, all right? Cancer screenings have all but ceased. Regular treatment has all but stopped. These portend very serious long-term consequences for those people who should have been screened and have not been, or people who have had symptoms that should have been checked, but they didn't. You know, on the plus side, we've learned to communicate by Zoom. I don't know how many people are on this here, but there's quite a few. We've learned that we can communicate differently, but it isn't quite the same. There is an emotional attachment to our connecting on a visceral level, on a human level. I'm sure you all miss hugs. I'm sure you miss shaking hands. I miss walking up and giving somebody a kiss on the cheek and saying hello. Those are things that we have learned, and it has impacted our health. So how have we learned to care for ourselves and for others in our lives through this? And the truth is, we struggle with that. We have struggled with a huge increase in domestic violence. We have reports that child abuse reports are way down. That sounds great, doesn't it? It's not great. It's the opposite. And the reason those reports are down is because nobody's watching those kids, all right? And nobody sees what's going on. Tensions are up. All of us are emotionally invested in whatever it is we're invested in these days. And our temperature has risen, not our physical temperature, because then you wouldn't be able to go anywhere because they take my temperature everywhere I go. Your temperature rises, so we're on edge all the time. It's really very serious. On the plus side, we're cooking again, right? How many of you have found those old cookbooks, all right? Don't you love some of the old recipes that you forgot about? I mean, that's terrific. The problem is you're making it for one, and how do you cut the recipe in half? I don't know. We've learned about FaceTime. We've learned about Skype. I joke in my regular presentation that I do all the time, but for Facebook and Skype, I'd never talk to my grandchildren. Little did I know how true that would be, but if it weren't for FaceTime and Skype, little would I talk to virtually anyone any longer. So we're getting trained on multiple new technologies. Many of us have learned about we've learned how to use our computers in ways we've never learned before, never knew before. So these are good, some of them are bad. How about staying healthy, all right? It's harder to stay healthy. The gyms are closed. If you go to the gym, the pool is closed. You can't play tennis. I don't bowl, but you can't go to the bowling alley. So how do you stay healthy? I don't know about you, but chair yoga doesn't work well for me, all right, especially on the Zoom camera. So how do we stay healthy? That is becoming more challenging. We're afraid to go outside for we may bump into somebody. Do we wear a mask outside or not wear a mask? These are all the unintended consequences of this that really have impacted us in ways that we're not sensitive to, but need to if we're ever going to recover from what this has brought to us. So the costs of quarantine are not just the reported positives or negatives, the number of tests, the number of hospitalizations, the mortality rate, or any of that. We have to think about how we best can cope with the consequences of this disease on our ability to stay connected to those we love, to stay healthy, to eat properly, to exercise, and to do all of that. So where do we go from here? Are the changes in our behavior permanent or are they temporary? And the answer is, I don't really know. And I'm not sure anybody can answer you. I don't know. What about assisted living? Are people going to be moving out of assisted living in droves as soon as they open up because they have been really kind of kept almost prisoner? Understandably so, by the way. There's no reason, and I'm not finding fault with that. All right. Are they going to, are people move into assisted and independent living for the camaraderie that it affords you, for the activities, for the socialization, for the help with meal preparation, et cetera, et cetera. Are our lives going to change with that? I don't know the answer. You're going to move people out, or are you going to move in? As you know, there's a new assisted living or independent living being built on every street corner in our area these days. There's no shortage of opportunity or options for you to go there. Are more people going to move from the Northeast because that's where it hit the hardest? Is that going to help your real estate value or hurt your real estate value? Are you going to stay in an apartment if your choice was to go to assisted living or not? What about your in-home care? What about Medicare versus managed care? What about those kind of things. What changes are you going to make? What about doctor visits? Somebody just asked me about a telehealth appointment with a physician. Do I think that's accurate or not? So I think, do I think they're accurate? You know, I've done a few telehealth calls myself. I'm not a big fan of those, honestly. I think in an emergency, in a pinch, they're there. My granddaughter got quite ill. My granddaughter is young enough to have gone to daycare every day because my daughter works with us. So she went every day, and she got really sick with symptoms that might, just might, have been confused with COVID-19. There was a moment in time that we were very scared. The telehealth protocol there was really very effective for her. The doctor did not want to see her. We certainly didn't want to take her to the hospital. Nobody wanted to bring her into the office. And the doctor was able to look in her throat, to look in her eyes, wasn't able to see clearly in her ears, but was able to diagnose that in fact it was a gastrointestinal virus and not a COVID virus. On the other hand, in my call with my physician, you know, I found my doctor not paying any more attention to me than he did when he's always on the computer when I'm in his office. So how helpful is it? I don't know, Emily. It's a good question. I think it's a challenge. But are doctor visits going to migrate into more telehealth visits in the future? I'm curious how you all feel when we open it up for Q&A. I want to know how you're going to change your diet and exercise programs. I'm going to want to know whether you guys have learned anything new that you want to share with everybody. I have a good one. Most of the people on this call or on this Zoom conference, you're travelers, right? We're the generation, right? I'm the same generation. I'm 70 years old. We're all the same generation. Are you getting back on a plane anytime soon? How about on a cruise ship? I mean, I, for one, am going on a cruise ship, but are you? I don't know. What is that going to do to the industries that we've come to depend on? And what about airplanes? I have to get on an airplane in a few weeks in my role in guardianship. I have a meeting I have to go to. Are you going to be able to do that? Are you ever going to travel again? How about going to Disney World? Anybody interested in doing that anytime soon? I don't see anybody shaking their heads at us. I don't want to talk on forever. I can talk about a whole host of things, that I'm willing to talk about from my book and change the subject from here. But I was asked to talk for about 20 minutes and then open it for Q&A. So does anybody have any question? Anybody want to raise their hand? I can't see everybody, but does everybody want to raise their hand? I can't see anybody. Got a lot of people on here. Emily's waving at me. All right, so nobody wants to type in a question or answer or ask me anything? Yeah. Go ahead, Emily.
I have a question. Basically, has this affected your business? Do your caregivers object to going into homes now? And do people in homes object to having strange people come in even though they need caregivers?
So the answer to your question is yes, it has affected my business, and no. So the healthiest of the people that I care for, those who have services 3 or 4 days a week, 4 hours at a time, they suspended service right out. They didn't want anybody coming in their house. They were very healthy and they were afraid. The people who were the least healthy, who needed more care, but whose care was often supplemented by family, all right, no longer could family come and visit them. And so they actually increased hours. Then there were the people we were talking about before who were afraid to go to hospitals, but who were in pain, maybe needed knee surgery, maybe had some other problems. And so that we picked up some new business during that period of time as well. So I would say my business has been impacted, not that much, maybe 8 or 10%. On the caregiver front, much like people like yourself didn't want caregivers coming into your house, caregivers were afraid in some cases of going into people's homes and then bringing it home to their kids, who would then bring it to their parents. So that was a bit of a challenge as well. The other thing is assisted living communities didn't want originally to let caregivers in, and then they realized they couldn't staff the needs, right? They were overwhelmed, which is understandable. And of course, hospitals, we do sitting sometimes, they would never let anybody in, and nursing homes didn't want to let anybody in. So in some cases, it's been a challenge. You know, we've been blessed. We have had one client at an independent living community test positive. And we tested everybody around them. We learned a lot about testing. This might be interesting to the whole audience. And Hannah, I know you have a question. I will get to you, I promise. The interesting is, you know, how do you know whether you should be tested or not? So the CDC guidelines are pretty clear. There is the person with the disease, test positive. That is the A person. The B person is anybody who has had any direct contact with that person for any length of time, who might be perceived to have maybe contracted it from that person. So that's B. B always gets tested. C is somebody who was in touch with B, and there is no guideline for that person to be tested. And we all know that you can be asymptomatic in here. So there's a lot of inadvertent transmission that people don't understand. And then you get to D, which is the person who's been in touch with C, or E, the person who's been in touch with that person. So we hear a lot on TV about contact tracing. That is what contact tracing is. Contact tracing is A goes to B, B to C, C to D. But the only people who get tested automatically every time are the people who have had direct contact with a person who has in fact been affected. So I hope that answers your question. Hannah wants to know about a gas pump or opening doors or standing too close to people ever again. So again, I guess that comes down to your tolerance for risk. Gas pumps scare me a little bit, I have to confess. I saw something today, just today in anticipation of this, that the 10 things that we do that are most likely to transmit the disease and the least likely. Interestingly enough, gas pumps were way down on the list. They were not deemed to be that dangerous. They were a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10. Opening doors, you know, it depends who you listen to. There's so much misinformation or disinformation or confusing information. I don't know how anybody would ever know exactly what to do. I know gloves are not what they are made out to be. A lot of people wear gloves and they don't realize they're actually adding to their risk, not really helping themselves. Masks are an interesting thing. So let's talk about masks, if you will. I take 6 sinus meds a day and I sleep with a CPAP machine. If I put a mask on myself, it is suffocating for me. I truly have a very difficult time wearing a mask. I do, when I'm required, wear a mask wherever it is required. But if it's optional, I never do. I'm not making a political statement. I don't support one party or the other on the issue of masks. But not everybody can or does, in fact, wear a mask. However, all right, I think if you're in a place where you're going to be in close contact with people and you can't maintain social distancing, then in fact a mask is important. We spend a great deal of time with the CDC guidelines. We follow the CDC guidelines all the time. And even there, it's very confusing. So, do I have any other questions? I'm looking to see if anybody's raising their hand. Helene, go ahead. I can't hear Helene. Sharon, can you open Helene? Can you unmute Helene?
I asked, Helene, you've got to unmute yourself. I asked to unmute.
Okay, restaurants and theater, what's the future?
Yeah, well, you know, it's a great question, and it really, that would interest me as well. I think the theater is not going to open probably until next year. I honestly think the theater may be one of the last to come back, which is a shame because I personally love the theater. I don't know how you social distance in a theater. I don't know how you sell every other seat. I don't know how you decide whether to sell my wife and I seats together or 6 feet apart. I also don't know how they can financially survive in this environment. And again, this is one man's opinion. It's not expert opinion in any way, shape, or form. But I believe until there is a vaccine that makes people comfortable, I think the theater, sporting events are going to be hard. golf opens this week without spectators. They're going to play the next 6 weeks without any spectators. And then they're going to open one to a lottery where 8,000 spectators on the golf course are going to be around. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion out there, uncertainty, and I think it's a moving target. You just read the headlines, you think the world is coming to an end, and then you read the next headline and it's not. So I do think, Helene, and for everybody else, this is going to come down to personal choice. How much risk are you willing to take? And where do you personally draw the line? I think we have been taught to be fearful to the extreme with this disease because it's very scary for this population that we're talking to. This population is the most at risk. We know that 50% of all deaths in this state have been in assisted living and nursing home communities. We know that the overwhelming mortality is over the age of 75 or 70 or 80, depending upon where you want to draw the line. We understand that anybody with comorbidities, with diabetes, overweight, high blood pressure, high cholesterol are significantly more at risk. We know that people like my grandchildren have very little risk. In Florida, as of a week ago, under the age of 25, there have been 0 deaths. In New York City, 16,000 deaths a few weeks ago, 16,000 deaths under the age of 25, 16 of them were under the age of 25. So this affects us, the people right here, disproportionately, and therefore it affects our behavior differently than it would affect the behavior of others. Here's the problem. Your grandkids want to come and visit you. They're not afraid. You are. Where do you draw the line? I don't know. That's kind of up to each of us, isn't it? It's hard. I think it's a hard thing. I see Joy's iPad. Got to unmute yourself, Joy. Okay. Still can't hear you, Joy.
Why do you feel rubber gloves are not necessary?
Why do I feel what? I'm sorry?
The gloves are not necessary.
Well, I think because if you're worried about the disease, most people will tell you that most professionals will tell you that the disease sticks to the glove and is more easily transmitted. You don't typically wash it off on your gloves. You do wash your hands. All right, so if you have a glove and you have added the disease to the glove, you are more likely, if you haven't washed that, to transmit it to whatever you touch next than if you use your bare hand and wash your hands or use sanitizer. I'm sure all of you have enough hand sanitizer to last you forever by now. And so I am a fan, as is the CDC, by the way, of washing your hands, using hand sanitizer, avoid touching your face. And I would say this, when you go to Publix, don't touch 6 pieces of fruit. Pick the one you like, take it, and put it in the box, all right? The less people start touching things, the better off we'll be. So.
Thank you.
Lucy asked on the chat room, once there's a vaccine, who will get it, who will decide? That's an interesting question. All the professionals are saying, much like the flu, they expect only about 50% will actually opt in to getting the vaccine. I have no way of knowing if that's true. I, for one, do not take a flu vaccine, but I would grab this in a New York minute. So I would take this vaccine in a New York minute. Who will get it? I think the most at-risk populations will be the first in line to get the vaccine when it's there. I do think, however, that there are multiple vaccines being tested at the moment. There's a lot of different ideology and ideas about which vaccines will be better. There's a British vaccine, which they say they're going to have 2 or 3 billion, that is with a B, doses available as early as September, but they still yet don't know if that is efficacious or not. So it's really interesting. Here's one of the other things we've learned, just to digress for a minute about the vaccine. Many of us, rightfully so, complained about medication costs over the years. We were attacking pharmaceutical companies on a regular basis because of the high cost of vaccines. As we've come to find out now through this, the cost of developing a vaccine is pretty expensive. And nobody is questioning the costs of that now. So is that going to change our view of pharmaceutical companies? I don't know. That's a question. I don't know how people are going to feel about that. I think that's a really interesting question. So Emily's asking, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the answer to this. Will there be a danger of taking a vaccine that is a live vaccine or one derived from the virus directly? Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. And anything I say there would be purely a guess. It's an interesting question, though. I don't know which. There are at least 3 or 4 different concepts in the drug development arena at the moment. But nobody is, never have we mobilized like we have for this. It's been an amazing accumulation of people. It really has. Anybody else there? Oh, I see Wendy Frank wants to ask a question.
Okay, let me get her. Hold on. Wendy? Okay. Go
Can you
ahead,
hear me?
Wendy.
Yes, I hear you, Wendy.
Okay, I tried writing, but I just can't seem to get it right.
Okay.
I just started in the last week or two trying to play cards with people because I live alone and I'm very isolated. For
Right.
other people, they're playing cards with their husbands. I don't, have anybody. So what I've been doing is having the person I'm playing with, wearing gloves and a mask, and they have a bag next to them that has extra gloves, mask and wipes, and an empty bag. If the other day somebody sneezed, so in the mask. So I had her step out on the patio and take everything off, put it in the clean, in the dirty bag, blow her nose, whatever, use the wipes, and then put clean stuff on. I don't know, it seemed to me that this was a pretty
You broke up at the end. I didn't hear the end of your question, Wendy, because you broke up, and I see you're still talking. But so
you guys couldn't hear me?
I heard you up until the last minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so anyway, anybody I've described this to, it feels like it's pretty thorough. I even have people because we're playing outside, we're not playing inside. Everybody has their own table fan, so air is blowing on them, but not a ceiling fan, so that everybody's air isn't blowing on everybody.
So with all that you're doing, I think you're more likely to be struck by lightning than catching COVID. I think you couldn't possibly do any more than you're doing, and I think you're perfectly safe to do that. And I think in that particular case, when you're all wearing gloves and you're not touching everything and going from one thing to another, and you're all wearing kind of gloves and touching the same thing, you're perfectly safe on gloves. So that wasn't my point about wearing gloves.
Just
my
so
point
you know,
yeah.
after we're done playing, I lay out the cards on an empty bed for 3 days, and then I turn them over 3 days later so that all the surface, because they say things stay on plastic for 3 days. I see the smiles and laughter, but I think I'm pretty thorough.
Look, Wendy, seriously, I said it earlier, okay? I think everybody's got to do what they feel most comfortable doing. Do I think that what you're doing is extreme? I do, but if it makes you feel safe, and here's the important part, it makes you feel safe and it solves your isolation problem. It is addressing the potential for depression born of having nobody to be with, if that makes you feel better, good for you. I would support that 100%.
Well, the issue was that a lot of people didn't want to get together.
Right.
So I came up with this to make, and I've really still only found a couple of people that feel safe doing it. A lot of other people say, you know, they still don't feel safe doing it. I feel like, what else can I do?
Well, I don't know. I said, I think you have a better chance of being struck by lightning than catching the disease. I mean that. I think it's great. But again, I'm not a doctor and I
All
can't.
right, so you're saying in terms of the gloves, meaning that if people are wearing gloves and then they wipe their nose 3 times, what's the point, right? Or that in other words, if they didn't change their gloves in between, if they wipe their nose and they don't change their gloves, then the gloves are contaminated. Is that
I
your
would
point?
say if they have the disease and they wipe their nose with their gloves and they have the disease will be on their glove. So in that case, they should change their gloves. But I also think if they didn't wear gloves and they washed their hands and didn't touch anything, that would be fine. But that's just me. If it makes you feel good.
Well, the thing is that's harder because then they would have to come into the house.
Yeah,
They're not going into the house.
I understand. No, I understand.
Yeah.
So, good for you. I mean, I think that's great. Somebody else asked me, do I think it'll be safe to travel on a cruise? And if so, when would it be safe? So again, I'm not an expert on cruise ships, but I've cruised a lot. I have about 25 cruises. I did a world cruise. If anybody wants to ask me about my world cruise, I did a world cruise last year, 85 days around the world. It was really, it was amazing. I'm happy to talk about that. That was one of the best things that ever happened. Fortunately, it was before coronavirus. I think cruise ships are some of the safest places I mean, they are experts at sanitizing as you get on and get off. They clean your room twice a day. The air is sanitized. Same thing with a plane. If you read the latest reports about air, the airplane air circulation is equivalent to most hospitals. The problem on an airplane is the person sitting next to you who coughs and sneezes. It's not the air filtration system. So if you're wearing a mask and you protect yourself and you sanitize and you try and stay as socially distant as possible. But look, I mean, again, I think everybody is who they are. I was on an airplane in 9/11. I was in the air when the planes crashed. I tell people it took an act of war to get US Air to get me to Charlotte on time, which they did. But I also went back on an airplane the very first day I was allowed after 9/11. You have to assess your own tolerance. Nobody can tell you what is best for you. And I think you have to make your own decisions. I think you have to believe or understand what it is you're willing to accept by this disease without endangering other people. That's where we get into trouble here. We think about how the impact of this is going to affect others, and that scares us to death. It does, and that's perfectly understandable. I think we have to keep a sense of humor. We have to look at different things, and that's it. I see Rabbi Barry has a question.
I want to thank you, Scott, for sharing some good information with us all. And just a few things to add. As you touched on, having a positive attitude is very, very helpful. It actually produces endorphins that make you get better. And when you get fearful and depressed and scared, it sets off a chain reaction that can actually make you sick and can make you more susceptible. So it's good to have a good attitude. It's really good to do some exercise. Really good. It's hard for people because they're inside, but you got to find something you can do. You got to find something you can do to keep active. Hopefully you can get outside, walk around, take a walk with the dog, get active, and don't be depressed about what's going on. You got to look at the bright side. You can still communicate with certain people. Just focus on what you can do and not what you can't do. Just think about what is it that you can still do, and there's things that you can do now that you didn't do before. And so you got to keep that positive attitude. Also, I'd be very wary about this vaccine because the vaccine is going to be issued in a hurry, and it's not going to go through the normal procedures of safeguards. So when the vaccine comes out, you're going to take someone who's healthy, and we're not really sure what's going to happen because it's not going to be like it usually is. Plus, the Centers for Disease Control have all been corrupted by politics. So whatever they're saying out of there, you don't really know. You just got to like do your research and figure out what's going on. and not just accept what somebody's telling you, because unfortunately today that doesn't work out too well. So I want to thank you, Scott, and maybe I'll just turn it back to you about the positive attitude. What do you want to share something about that and how that's helpful?
So I think so I can't thank you enough, Rabbi, for those comments, because you're exactly right. I'm a firm believer in glass half full as opposed to half empty. I think what we have learned from this experience is we've learned the importance of family. We've learned the importance of staying connected. We've learned the importance of those around us. We have gotten a little of our humanity back, perhaps. There are some bad things, there's no question about that. But we will survive this, and we will thrive, and we will come out on the other end better for it. It may not seem that way. So I talked to you before about I'm very involved in the world of Alzheimer's. I'm a nationally certified Alzheimer's educator. I'm very close. While I'm sitting here watching, a commercial came on for David Watson. He's a good friend of mine, Alzheimer's Research and Treatment Center. To your point, Rabbi, about the vaccine, he's currently doing 19 clinical trials. He's done hundreds of clinical trials throughout the years. And he tells me in every case, the mice run faster, climb higher, eat better, exercise better until they don't. So your caution about the vaccine is valid. We are definitely rushing this through. A lot of vaccines showed a lot of promise in the world of Alzheimer's that have not panned out. That may in fact be true with this vaccine. So I would be cautious, but I do think we're doing the best that we possibly can there. Look, I think anything that gives us hope is positive, and I think that's there. I think what we ought to be able to take away from this is we've spent more time learning. We've spent more time, hopefully, talking to our friends and family as best that we possibly can in a way that was different. We have spent more time thinking about that which was important versus that which we thought was important. And there is a difference. I know there are two other questions, so I'll go to those and I'll come back and I'll close out after that. What about buffet on cruises? You wouldn't get me to another buffet if it was the only thing left on the ship to eat and I hadn't eaten in days, okay? I will never go to a buffet again. There's a meme out there about following, it was done in Japan, about following somebody who went to a buffet and watching where it spread. It would scare the bejesus out of you. Not Jesus, but Jesus. I'm sorry, Rabbi. And then what are the effects of having the virus? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. But then again, I'll get another question, so before I end. In a different conversation, we tell us a bit about your book. There are likely others in addition who might, interesting title. Oh my God, I'm getting older, so is my mom. I write about a lot of things that confront boomers and their parents. I write about things, everything from funerals, all right? I ask you, do you want to be buried on the first floor, the third floor, the fifth floor? Do you want to be buried side by side, head to toe? Do you want to be buried under a tree, out in the shade, or in the or out in the sun? Do you want your ashes scattered? If so, by who? Do you want to be buried with your first husband, your second husband, or your boyfriend? All of those things are things that you can think about. So I talk about things that are serious, but in a fun way. I talk about advanced directives. We've learned a lot about that here. I talk a lot about advanced directives. I talk about sex after 60. Fortunately, my kids aren't on the call. Between you and me, sex after 60 does happen. Happens more than you think. I'll tell you a quick story. I hope I'll make you laugh about that, a positive attitude. This is a true story. At the age of 75, 1 out of 4 people are having sex once a week. 25% of people 75 and older are having sex once a week. I was being interviewed for a magazine and she was fascinated by that statistics. And she was about 25. She was newly hired as a writer. And she called me and she asked me specifically about that. And I said, yes, it's true. 25% of people who are 75 are having sex once a week. You know what she said to me? I can't wait till I'm 75. And that is a true story. So I try to make light of those things. I talk about taking the keys away, which is really an interesting thing. The introduction, the foreword was written by Sharon Bach, who's the Palm Beach County Clerk and Controller. The preface was written by Jenny Frumer, who at the time was the CEO of Albert Jewish Family and Children's Service. I dedicated to my father who died, father-in-law who died of Alzheimer's disease. And I cover the gamut. I'll ask you a question. Telehealth, here's another question for you. Anybody ever say to you, go to my doctor, he's second best? They always say, go to my doctor, he's the best. Oh, he's a big guy. So those are the topics I cover. How do you choose a good topic? So a lot of that. So it's called, Oh My God, I'm Getting Older, So Is My Mom. It's available on Amazon, or you can reach out to me on my website and we can do it directly, sell it to you directly. If you reference this, I could even send you one free if you reference this meeting tonight. And the radio show is the same title. It's on Monday nights, live from 6 to 7, but it's also podcast. You just search OMG, I'm Getting. Last week we talked about Alzheimer's. This week we're talking about a new exercise and health system called EGOSCU. It's a very interesting, something I never heard of before. It's terrific. So, and then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking to a surgeon about elective surgery, and then I'm going to be talking to the medical director of Boca West Hospital to talk about how this has impacted hospitals. So it runs the gamut. So, anyway, I think I've probably, well, thank you, Emily. That's kind. Rabbi, raise your hand again.
I want to thank you, Scott, for sharing some really good information. I know you're available in the future, that this isn't the last time we'll be hearing from you. You're always welcome at Va-Dor to share information with us, and maybe we'll have you come back in a couple of months and you can give us an update. But I do appreciate the great information you shared. I also want to let everybody know on the call that Va-Dor is continuing to function. We're doing well. We're functioning in new and different ways. We're really interested in getting your feedback. All right, so we're putting out the Shabbat celebrations. We're doing discussions. We got the interactive oneg, but I usually get to hear feedback on Shabbat. I can hear if people are laughing, they're not, they're falling asleep, whatever. I don't get that right now because it's on the internet. So let us know what we're doing and what you'd like to see more of and what you'd like to see less of. This month, the country is going through convulsions and also upheavals and change. And so there's potential for some really positive change. We want to be a part of that. Va-Dor gets involved in these issues, and we're part of the change. And everybody here could be part of writing a chapter in history. So I'm encouraging you to join us in our discussions. After the Shabbat, this one is going to be different. Usually we've been doing just a recorded version of it. This Shabbat, tomorrow night, it's going to be live. And so we're going to insert taped videos, but part of it's going to be live. And when it's over, and I don't know exactly when, depends how long-winded the rabbi is. No, actually my sermon's taped, but when it's over, probably around 8:10, 8:15, something like that, then we're just going to go right into an interactive oneg. We've done them two ways. One, everybody just says what's with them and what their grandkids are doing and who graduated from where, and they catch up. That kind of stuff is good. But we've also done some discussions. That part is good too. Some people think it should just be discussion. Some people think it should just be catching up. We're going to do a little of both. So everybody's going to be happy, hopefully. What we do at Va-Dor is we invite discussion of people who disagree with each other. And that's a really good thing because you don't see that much anymore. You don't really see Democrats and Republicans mixing it up and having exchange of views, or Christians and Jews. It doesn't happen too often. And we have an opportunity to make it happen because we allow everybody to talk about anything. But the only way it works is if people recognize that you don't have to get angry because somebody disagrees with you. Outside of Va-Dor, there's a lot of anger. We want to be an anger-free zone. So feel free to say anything you want. You can tell me you think I'm dead wrong, and I appreciate it. I like hearing that because it gives me a chance to respond. As long as it's done in a friendly way. not angry. This month, we will be talking about Black Lives Matter, about the organization. We're going to talk about the movement. We're going to talk about police reform. We're going to talk about protest. We're going to talk about defunding the police and whether that's an insane idea or what should be done. And I'll just tell you this before we go. I've sued the police. I've represented the police. I've been involved in protests. I know a lot about Black Lives Matter. I do a lot of work with African Americans. I'm going to be talking about this issue, and I want to hear from you. And also, Suzanne tells me, I don't understand why this makes sense, but she tells me we all have to subscribe to Va-Dor. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but you subscribe to the website, or you subscribe to the Gmail account, or the YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube account, and it helps us in some ways. Maybe she can explain it much better than I, because you can see I'm totally inept. But I think you got to subscribe to the YouTube account, and we need you, and we need to spread the word. If you want to help Va-Dor, watch Shabbat and tell other people to do it. And we're going to have high holiday services. They're going to be really cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. The school board, I just found out they're probably going to open up the school. Whether we're going to take them up on it or not, the board will talk about that. But we will have high holiday services. They will be meaningful. They'll be beautiful. They'll be online, and they might also be in a building. I want to thank Scott again, and thanks everybody else for joining us. And Suzanne, if you want to get involved and share some words, go right ahead.
Rabbi, I want to thank you. Hannah, I want to thank you for suggesting I do this. Sharon, I want to thank you for setting this up. Emily, I want to thank you for your smiling face. And I can't thank everybody enough for participating. I hope you enjoyed it. Rabbi, thanks for inviting me back. I'll come anytime. Somebody asked me about my company. It's called Comfort Care, COMFORCARE. Just look it up, Palm Beach Comfort Care. It's even a diving office in Delray too. Pick it up, give us a call. I'll be able to tell you more about it. I can't thank you all enough. You guys are terrific. I appreciate the feedback and the messages. I hope you all stay safe, stay well, wash your hands, okay? And we'll see you around soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you again for being part of this Va-Dor program. Thank you all for participating. And we hope to see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for our Shabbat live on Zoom. Go to ladorvador.org and pick up the website there and the Zoom link. Thanks a lot and good night.